He never planned to keep her alive. That was the truth hidden beneath the silk suits and silent rooms where empires were traded like chess pieces. She was supposed to be a mistake, a name crossed out before it ever mattered. One order, one signature. Gone. Then she looked at him. Not with fear, not with ambition, but with the quiet confusion of someone who had no idea she had just stepped into a world where mercy did not exist. In that moment, he hesitated, and hesitation was something he had never allowed himself before. By dawn, he had done the unthinkable. He spared her life and marked her as his weakness. What he didn't know was this: the night he decided to protect her was the same night his enemies decided to use her. And the woman he believed he could control would become the reason his empire burned. This is not a love story born from fate. It is the story of a man who made one mistake and a woman who refused to be destroyed by it. She should never have been there. That truth hovered over the night like a sentence waiting to be carried out, though she wouldn't understand it until much later. The gala occupied the highest floor of a glass tower that sliced cleanly through the city skyline, a place where crystal chandeliers reflected power rather than light. Men in tailored suits exchanged quiet handshakes worth millions, sometimes lives, beneath smiles polished to perfection. This was not a place for mistakes. And yet, she was one. She stood near the edge of the room with a slim folder pressed to her chest, her black dress deliberately simple, chosen to disappear rather than attract attention. She was only there to deliver documents. 5 minutes in, 5 minutes out. That was the plan. A routine task, one she had done countless times before, without incident, until she realized the name on the envelope was wrong. The letters felt heavier than paper as she glanced down, her pulse quickening. She checked again, then once more, hoping it was her nerves playing tricks on her. It wasn't. The name belonged to someone she didn't recognize, someone important enough to make the air around it feel dangerous. She lifted her gaze, scanning the room for an assistant, anyone she could quietly hand the envelope to and explain the error. That was when it happened. He looked at her. There was no dramatic pause in the music, no sudden hush. Laughter continued. Glasses clinked. Conversations flowed uninterrupted. And yet, the space between them seemed to contract, as if the room itself had noticed the shift before she did. His gaze was steady, unreadable, and far too precise to be accidental. He did not look at her the way men usually did. There was no appreciation, no curiosity, no hunger. It was the look of a predator who had spotted something out of place in his territory and was deciding whether it was a threat. Her breath caught. She took a step back, instinct screaming that she had just wandered into something irreversible. Another step and she could reach the exit. The elevator. The safety of a world where men like him existed only in rumors and headlines. She turned to leave. Wait. The word was calm, almost lazy, yet it cut through the noise with surgical authority. She froze. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved, but one of the men standing near him was suddenly at her side, blocking her path with courteous efficiency. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, forcing a polite smile she didn't feel. "I think there's been a mistake. I was just leaving." He approached then, unhurried, his presence commanding without effort. Up close. He felt taller than he was, the kind of man who bent rooms around himself without ever needing to prove it. His suit was immaculate, his expression composed, his eyes sharp enough to make her feel exposed. "You know too much already," he said. The words were spoken gently. The implication was anything but. "I don't," she replied, the honesty in her voice raw. "I haven't heard anything. I didn't even want to be here." Something flickered in his gaze, gone before she could name it. He glanced at the envelope in her hand. "That name," he said softly. "Where did you get it?" "I was told to deliver it," she answered. "That's all." For a moment, he studied her in silence, weighing something she couldn't see. The pause stretched, tight and suffocating, until she wondered if she should run, if running would matter at all. Then he nodded once, decision made. "Come with me." It wasn't a request. She found herself walking beside him through corridors that peeled away from the public spectacle, leaving music and laughter behind like echoes from another life. The lighting dimmed. The air grew cooler. By the time the elevator doors slid shut, her hands were trembling despite her effort to remain calm. "Am I in trouble?" she asked quietly. The elevator descended in smooth, soundless motion, glass walls revealing the city sinking below them. He didn't answer right away. "That depends," he said at last, "on how honest you continue to be." The drive that followed felt unreal. Streets blurred past tinted windows as she tried to convince herself that this was still a misunderstanding. That powerful men did not simply abduct people from galas and expect no consequences. When the car stopped, she stepped out into a penthouse overlooking the city like a throne above a kingdom. "This is temporary," he said as she took in the quiet luxury, the space designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. "Until I'm certain you're safe." Safe. From what? She didn't ask. Exhaustion eventually claimed her, tension dragging her into sleep on silk sheets that didn't smell like home. Before sleep took her completely, she told herself he had saved her from something she didn't understand. That his calm authority was protection, not a cage. While she slept, he stood alone in his private study, watching a screen fill with information. Her information. Her name, her past, her routines, family ties, financial records. Every detail of her life unfolded beneath his gaze with ruthless efficiency. "She's clean," one of his men reported quietly. No known connections. He didn't look away from the screen. "Everyone has connections." He replied, "They just don't know it yet." Then he saw it. A pattern buried deep within the data. A subtle trail that didn't belong to her, but led straight to her. Someone had nudged her into that gala. Someone had ensured she carried the wrong envelope, that she stood in the wrong place at precisely the wrong moment. He leaned back slowly, a rare tension tightening his jaw. She hadn't stepped into his world by accident. She had been pushed. And whoever had orchestrated it hadn't intended for her to walk out alive. His gaze returned to the live feed of her sleeping peacefully in the next room, unaware of the storm gathering around her. He had spared her without knowing why. Now he understood the cost of that hesitation. Keeping her alive would be dangerous. Letting her go would be worse. By morning, he had already made his choice. And somewhere beyond the glass walls of his empire, unseen hands began to move, satisfied that their first piece had landed exactly where it was meant to. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Morning arrived quietly, as if the city itself understood where it was not welcome. She woke to unfamiliar stillness, the kind that pressed against her ears and made her aware of every breath she took. The ceiling above her was too high, too flawless, devoid of the small imperfections that made a place feel lived in. For a brief, disoriented moment, she wondered if the night before had been a dream. Then memory returned, sharp and undeniable. The elevator, his voice, the way the city had fallen away beneath glass walls. She sat up slowly, drawing the silk sheet closer around herself, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt. The room was beautiful in a way that felt intentional rather than comforting, designed to impress, to dominate. Nothing here belonged to her. That realization settled heavily in her chest. A soft knock broke the silence. A woman entered, composed and polite, introducing herself as part of the household staff. Breakfast was ready. Fresh clothes had been prepared. If she needed anything, she only had to ask. The words were gentle. The meaning beneath them was not. She dressed carefully, choosing simplicity over elegance, as if refusing the luxury might somehow keep her grounded. When she stepped into the dining area, he was already there, standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows with his back to her. The city stretched out beneath him like a conquered territory. "You slept," he said without turning. "Yes." "Good." The exchange ended there. Breakfast passed in near silence. He skimmed reports on a tablet while she picked at food she had no appetite for, every so often. She felt his attention settle on her, brief but precise, like a reminder that she was not forgotten, merely observed. "You can leave today," he said suddenly. Relief surged through her so fast it made her lightheaded. "I can... for now." He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Until I'm certain no one intended to use you to reach me. I need to know where you are, who you speak to, where you work." The relief fractured into something colder. "You're monitoring me," she said quietly. "I'm protecting you." "By watching my every move, by staying ahead of anyone who might hurt you," he replied, "including people you don't realize are paying attention." She wanted to argue, to insist that her life was ordinary, insignificant. But something in his tone told her he did not deal in reassurance, only in probabilities. A car took her home later that morning. The driver said nothing. The city outside the window felt louder, harsher, yet comforting in its familiarity. When she stepped back into her small apartment, she exhaled shakily, relief loosening the tension she had carried since the night before. Everything was exactly where she had left it. And yet, it all felt different. She noticed the black car across the street before she noticed anything else. Parked casually, engine off, easy to ignore if one wasn't looking for it. The same car was there the next day, and the day after that. He didn't call. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. At first, she told herself it was temporary, a precaution, something that would end once he was satisfied she posed no risk. When an unfamiliar man lingered too close on the subway, she noticed how quickly he was intercepted. When her phone rang from a private number and disconnected before she could answer, it never rang again. Dangers vanished before they could reach her. It was comforting. That realization frightened her more than anything else. He began to appear in her life without warning. A message asking where she was, a car waiting outside her office at dusk, invitations to dinner phrased like options, but delivered like expectations. "You don't have to," she said one evening, standing outside a quiet restaurant as he held the door open for her. "I know," he replied. "You're still here." She didn't know when resistance turned into acceptance, when tension softened into something quieter, heavier. He never touched her without permission, never raised his voice, never threatened her. Instead, he listened. Late nights turned into conversations stretched thin by guarded honesty. He spoke little about himself, but when he did, it was without embellishment. She learned that trust, in his world, was a finite resource, that betrayal was not theoretical to him, but a lesson paid for in blood. She saw glimpses of the man beneath the control, the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was watching, the rare smile that appeared and vanished before it could settle, the discipline it took to remain untouchable, against her better judgment. She began to care. She noticed the moment it happened, the way her pulse quickened when his name appeared on her phone, the way his presence no longer felt like surveillance, but something closer to reassurance. He noticed too. "You trust me," he said one night, watching her closely. She didn't deny it. "You've never given me a reason not to." Something unreadable passed through his gaze. What she didn't see was the meeting that took place later that night. A quiet room, familiar faces, her name spoken with interest rather than curiosity. "She's close," someone observed. He responded without hesitation. "She stays where I can see her." For the first time since she had entered his world, his control was no longer about caution. It was about fear. Because somewhere between protection and possession, something had shifted. And whether he acknowledged it or not, the idea of losing her had begun to feel far more dangerous than any enemy he had ever faced. The first thing she noticed was the silence. It was different from before, sharper, heavier, as if something essential had been deliberately removed. A full day passed without a message from him. No car across the street, no quiet check-in disguised as concern. She told herself this was what she wanted. Space, normality, freedom from invisible eyes. Yet unease settled in her chest and refused to leave. That evening, rain washed the city in muted silver as she returned to the penthouse he had insisted remain available to her just in case. She told herself she would stay only one night. The storm made the streets feel unsafe, and she was tired of being brave all the time. The moment she stepped inside, she knew something was wrong. The lights in his study were on. He never left them on. She hesitated at the doorway, instinct urging her to turn away, to respect a boundary that had never been explicitly drawn but always understood. Curiosity won, or perhaps it was the quiet fear that this space held answers she had been avoiding. She stepped inside. The room was bathed in the cold glow of a large screen left active on the desk. Files were open, lines of text scrolled slowly, methodically. She recognized the format instantly. Background reports. Her breath stilled. She moved closer, heart pounding, and saw her name displayed in stark, unforgiving clarity. Not once, but repeatedly. Photographs filled the screen her leaving work. Sitting alone at a cafe, unlocking her apartment door. Each image stamped with dates that stretched back weeks, months. Her vision blurred. She scrolled further. Psychological profile, routine analysis, behavioral predictions. And then the words that hollowed her out completely. Potential leverage. Emotional proximity confirmed. Subject unaware. The room seemed to tilt around her. She wasn't being protected. She was being positioned. A sound behind her made her spin around. He stood in the doorway, rain darkening his coat, his expression instantly unreadable. The silence between them thickened, heavy with everything she had just discovered. "How long?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "How long have you been watching me?" His gaze flicked briefly to the screen before returning to her. "You weren't meant to see that." The words cut deeper than denial ever could. "So it's true," she said. "Every coincidence. Every moment you appeared when I felt unsafe. None of it was chance. I anticipated outcomes." He replied, You were one of them. Her hands trembled. You talk about me like I'm a calculation. In my world, he said quietly, calculations keep people alive, or turn them into tools. Silence followed, not because he disagreed, but because he didn't deny it. Did you ever intend to tell me, she asked. Yes. When it no longer mattered. Something broke inside her then, quietly and completely. So I'm safe, she said softly. As long as I'm useful. That's not... Isn't it? She interrupted. Would you still be protecting me if I had no value to your enemies, for the first time since she had met him? He hesitated. The pause was brief, but it told her everything. She stepped back, putting distance between them. You should have trusted me. Trust is earned, he said. No, she replied, her voice trembling now. Trust is chosen. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. If you walk out now, they'll notice. She faced him again, anger and hurt colliding in her chest. And if I stay, you'll be safe. The word felt different now, heavier, more dangerous. She laughed quietly. That's not safety. That's a cage. She left without another word. The rain swallowed her as she stepped back into the night. Every sound amplified, every shadow threatening. She walked without direction, replaying every memory with brutal clarity the way he always seemed to know where she was, how danger vanished before it reached her, how she had mistaken control for care. And yet, beneath the anger, something else stirred, grief, because part of her had believed him. Across the city, he stood alone in his study, the screen dark now, the silence unbearable. He replayed her expression in his mind, the betrayal there cutting deeper than any threat ever had. She knows, one of his men said quietly over the phone. I know. She's vulnerable now. Yes, he replied, which is why no one touches her. The warning was unmistakable, but elsewhere, in a room she would never see, her name was spoken again, not as collateral this time, but as opportunity. She's slipping away from him. Someone said, that makes her dangerous. And for the first time since she had stepped into his world, the danger surrounding her was no longer something he fully controlled, because the secret she had uncovered had already begun to shift the balance of power. And this time, it was aimed straight at her. She realized something was wrong before it happened. It wasn't fear. Fear had become familiar, almost manageable. This was something sharper, more deliberate, like the moment just before glass shatters. The city felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't come from peace but from preparation. He hadn't contacted her since the night she walked out. No messages, no warnings, no invisible hands clearing danger from her path. For the first time since entering his world, she was truly alone in it. She tried to convince herself this was freedom, that she had chosen distance, and distance was what she deserved. Yet as days passed, she felt eyes where there were none, sensed movement where streets remained empty. Someone was circling, not clumsily, not recklessly, but with patience. They were waiting. The call came on the third night, an unfamiliar number, no introduction. A calm voice that spoke as if refusal had already been accounted for. We need to talk, the man said. For your safety. She should have hung up. She knew that. But the voice wasn't threatening. It carried the same measured authority she had learned to associate with him, with his world. And that familiarity disarmed her more effectively than force ever could. The location was public, almost deliberately so. A private lounge beneath a luxury hotel, shielded by glass and soft music. Neutral ground, safe ground. She arrived early, every nerve alert. When the man approached, recognition struck her immediately. He was one of his, not close enough to be trusted, not distant enough to be insignificant. The realization tightened her chest. You shouldn't be here, she said, standing. You shouldn't have left, he replied evenly. This isn't about control. It's about survival. Where is he? She asked. The hesitation in his eyes answered before he spoke. Handling a situation. Her stomach dropped. I am the situation. The world fractured without warning. Hands seized her from behind, swift and practiced. Panic surged as she struggled. But the grip was unforgiving, designed to restrain without leaving marks. The man in front of her didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This will be easier if you don't resist, he said. Her heart hammered painfully. He wouldn't do this, she whispered, more plea than certainty. No one contradicted her. She was guided through back corridors, down into a private garage where a dark vehicle waited with its engine already running. The door closed. The city vanished behind tinted glass. She waited for him. For a call. For an order. For anything. Nothing came. By the time the car stopped, fear had hardened into something heavier understanding. She was led into a room stripped of comfort and personality, illuminated by a single overhead light. It wasn't a prison. It didn't need to be. It was a place designed for compliance. The door opened again. He entered. Relief surged so sharply it hurt. "You came," she said, standing despite herself. He didn't look at her. "I need you to listen carefully," he said. The tone froze her blood. "Why am I here?" "There's pressure on my organization," he replied calmly. "Someone believes you're leverage." Her laugh was thin and disbelieving. "Because you made me leverage?" "Yes," he said simply. The honesty stunned her more than any lie could have. "I can end this," he continued. "But they need to believe you're no longer under my protection." The meaning landed with merciless clarity. "You're handing me over," she said quietly. "I'm letting them think they've won. And what happens to me while you prove your point?" Her voice trembled despite her effort to remain steady. "You won't be harmed. You don't know that." "I do," he said, "because I'll be watching every move they make." The words sounded practiced, controlled, empty. "You said you'd keep me safe," she whispered. "I am." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're protecting your empire." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything he refused to say. "If you trust me," he began. She cut him off. "You lost that right." For the first time, he didn't argue. He turned away. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through her chest. Time fractured after that. Minutes blurred into hours. She sat alone, replaying every choice that had led her here, every moment she had mistaken restraint for care. When the door opened again, it wasn't him. They questioned her calmly, politely, as if civility could disguise intent. She answered little, guarding what remained of herself with growing resolve. They wanted fear, dependency, collapse. She gave them none. The deepest wound came later, when she overheard voices beyond the door. He didn't hesitate. One said, "He never does." Another replied, "That's why he always wins." The words settled inside her, cold and final. By dawn, she was released without explanation, left on an empty street with nothing but exhaustion and clarity. Her phone vibrated once. A message from him. "It's over. You're safe now." She stared at the screen, hands shaking, then turned the phone off. He never saw her walk away. He never heard the promise she made to herself as the city slowly woke around her. She would never be powerless again. Across the city, he stood in a boardroom filled with men congratulating him on a decisive victory. His enemies were exposed. His empire remained intact. Yet the silence she left behind followed him relentlessly. Because in choosing power, he had made the one mistake no calculation could undo. He had lost her. And this time, there would be no explanation that could bring her back. She disappeared without drama. No sirens, no headlines, no trace dramatic enough to satisfy the kind of men who thrived on spectacle. When morning came, the street where she had been left behind filled with ordinary life, unaware that something irreversible had just taken place. She walked until her legs ached, then kept walking. The city no longer felt like home, but it no longer felt hostile either. It was simply a place where she existed, unnoticed, unclaimed, for the first time since stepping into his world. No one watched her cross the street. No car slowed behind her. No message arrived asking where she was. The silence was terrifying and freeing. She went back to her apartment only once, not to stay, but to erase herself from it. She packed with ruthless efficiency, reducing her life to what could be carried without weight. Clothes folded, documents gathered. Anything that tied her to routine, to predictability, to him, was left behind. When she found her phone, his name still sat there, untouched since the night before. For a long moment, she stared at it, memories pressing against her chest like a second heartbeat. Then she deleted it. By the time night fell, she was gone. He felt it before anyone confirmed it. The penthouse was too quiet. The air itself seemed to resist him, pressing in where her presence had once lingered. Screens flickered with updates, surveillance feeds refreshing again and again, offering nothing but emptiness. "She hasn't returned home," one of his men reported. "I know," he replied. "They searched anyway. Apartments, hospitals, hotels that specialized in discretion, transportation hubs where faces blurred into anonymity. Her accounts were untouched, her devices abandoned. She had not fled in panic. She had planned. Days passed, then weeks. The world continued to bow to him. ignorant of the fracture spreading beneath its polished surface. Meetings proceeded, deals closed. His voice still carried authority enough to still rooms. Yet something was wrong. He began waking at night, not from nightmares, but from memory. Small, insignificant moments resurfaced without warning. The way she paused before answering questions, the careful honesty in her gaze, the trust she had offered him not as currency, but as choice. He told himself this was distraction, a miscalculation, a problem that could be solved. But problems did not feel like grief. Meanwhile, she learned how to live unseen. She changed her name first, then her hair, then the rhythm of her days. She chose work that demanded competence but offered anonymity, places where people passed without curiosity. At first, every unfamiliar sound made her tense. Every shadow seemed intentional. Slowly, fear reshaped itself into awareness. She learned to read spaces instinctively, to spot exits, to trust the quiet voice inside her rather than the comfort of proximity. Dependence had nearly destroyed her. She would not allow it again. At night, memories crept in uninvited. His voice, calm and precise, the illusion of safety she had mistaken for care. She allowed herself one moment of grief. No more, then locked it away. He had chosen power. She chose survival. Back in the city, the first cracks appeared. They were subtle enough that only someone like him would notice. A trusted ally hesitated before agreeing. A long-standing arrangement required reassurance it had never needed before. Loyalty, once assumed, now demanded proof. You've been distracted, someone observed during a negotiation. He didn't argue, because distraction implied carelessness. This was something else entirely. The truth surfaced slowly, cruel in its clarity. The pressure on his organization had never been random. The attention on her had not been incidental. She had not been leverage. She had been bait. The realization struck harder than any betrayal. The moment he allowed her to be used, he had exposed the only weakness that mattered: himself. She was never the target. He said quietly to the one man he still trusted, "No." The man agreed. "You were..." Silence followed, heavy and final. He began dismantling his own defenses, severing ties that no longer felt secure, redirecting resources, disrupting patterns he himself had built. Power shifted, deliberately unsettled. "You're weakening your position," a voice warned. "I'm correcting it," he replied. The truth was simpler. For the first time in his life, he was afraid. Not of losing power, not of death, but of what would happen if she was pulled back into a war she had never chosen. Across the distance between them, she felt the past stir again. A question asked at work that lingered too long. A stranger who watched without interest, without emotion. A coincidence that felt rehearsed. The world she thought she had escaped had not forgotten her. One evening, she found an envelope slipped beneath her door. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed her entering the building that morning. The timestamp was recent. Her hands trembled once, then steadied. They hadn't stopped looking because he wanted her safe. They had stopped because someone else wanted her found first. She burned the photograph and memorized every detail before the flame consumed it. When the report reached him, it arrived with brutal efficiency. A confirmed sighting, a narrow window, a trail that would go cold quickly. He stared at the screen for a long time. This time, he didn't send men. He went alone, not to reclaim what he believed belonged to him, but to face the consequence of a choice he could no longer undo. Because she had disappeared to survive, and when she resurfaced, as unresolved things always do, the balance between them would never be the same again. Power did not collapse in a single moment. It eroded. At first, the signs were subtle enough to ignore, a delayed response where certainty had once been immediate. A meeting postponed without explanation, a familiar name missing from a list that should have been predictable. His empire still stood, polished and intact, but the foundations had begun to shift, grain by grain, as if something essential had been quietly removed. He worked longer hours, slept less. Control had always been his remedy for uncertainty. It no longer worked. The nights were the worst. Silence pressed in where her presence had once lingered, uninvited but constant. He found himself standing at the windows long after midnight, city lights stretching endlessly below, replaying a single memory with merciless precision, the way she had looked at him when she finally understood what he had done. Not angry, disappointed. That expression followed him everywhere. The first real fracture came during a negotiation he had already won. The numbers were solid, the leverage perfect, the outcome inevitable. Yet halfway through, the opposing party leaned back, studying him with calm interest. "You're distracted," the man said. That makes you predictable. The meeting ended without a signature. Back in his office, he demanded answers. Reports flooded in, dense with data and speculation. Somewhere between figures and names, a pattern emerged that tightened something cold around his chest. She had never been the leverage they believed. She had been the signal, the pressure on his organization, the sudden focus on her, the insistence that she be brought closer, controlled, visible. It had all been designed to force his hand, to make him reveal the one thing he had never allowed anyone to see: his weakness. He stood very still as the truth settled. He had believed he was manipulating the board. Instead, he had announced his vulnerability to anyone patient enough to watch. She was bait, he said quietly to the one man he still trusted. Yes, came the reply. And once you chose your empire over her, they knew exactly who you were. Silence followed, heavy and unforgiving. Across the distance that separated them, she was learning a similar lesson. Anonymity had kept her alive, but it was beginning to crack. A question at work that lingered too long, a stranger whose gaze slid past her with calculated disinterest, a coincidence that felt rehearsed. She no longer panicked. Panic wasted energy. She observed. The photograph had confirmed what she already suspected. The world she had escaped had not forgotten her. It was merely approaching from a different angle now. She burned the image and committed every detail to memory. Fear no longer ruled her. Awareness did. Back in the city, he began dismantling himself. He severed alliances that once defined him, redirected resources, altered patterns so familiar they had become instinct. Men who had followed him for years watched with unease as he made decisions that sacrificed profit for discretion, power for unpredictability. You're weakening your position, someone warned. No, he replied. I'm correcting it. The truth was simpler than strategy. For the first time in his life, he was afraid, not of losing power, not of death, but of what would happen if she was pulled back into a war she had never chosen. He traced her disappearance with renewed urgency, not to reclaim her, but to stay ahead of those who would use her to reach him. Each lead ended the same way. She had been there. Then she was gone, always one step ahead. He should have felt pride. Instead, it felt like loss. When confirmation finally arrived, it came without ceremony. A location. A narrow window before the trail vanished again. He stared at the screen long after it dimmed, aware that this time, sending men would only draw attention. So he didn't. He left the city without announcement, without protection, without the armor he had worn for so long. He traveled as no one, shedding the name that once opened doors and silenced rooms. Each mile put distance between him and the man he had been. He found her where he least expected. Not hiding, not running, living. The sight struck harder than any confrontation could have. She stood among strangers who knew nothing of her past, her posture steady, her expression composed. There was strength there he hadn't given her, strength she had claimed for herself. He didn't approach. Not yet. He watched instead, understanding something that had eluded him for too long. She was no longer his to protect, or his to endanger. Whatever connection remained between them would have to be chosen, not enforced, and choice was something he had never offered her before. That night, he sat alone in a small room far from glass towers and whispered deals, the weight of his decisions pressing in from every direction. Power had always promised safety. Control had always delivered certainty. Both had lied. Because the one thing he had never calculated the cost of treating a human life as collateral was the one thing that had undone him completely. When he finally allowed himself to imagine facing her again, it wasn't with apologies rehearsed or promises sharpened to persuade. It was with the understanding that whatever she decided would stand, even if it meant losing her forever. The price of power, he realized too late, was not what it demanded from others. It was what it took from the man who believed he could wield it without consequence. And somewhere ahead, she was stepping closer to a truth of her own, one that would force both of them to confront what remained after survival hardened into strength. Because when a woman learns to live without fear, she becomes dangerous to anyone who once mistook her for disposable, and the next time their paths crossed, nothing between them would be decided by force. She sensed him before she saw him. It wasn't fear that warned her. Fear had become something she understood, something she could measure and manage. This was recognition, quiet, intimate, impossible to mistake. The air shifted around her, heavy with the familiarity she had taught herself to ignore. She was locking the door to the small office where she now worked, when his voice came from behind her. You shouldn't be here. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second before turning. He stood a few steps away, alone,
stripped of the presence that once announced him before he ever spoke. No men flanking him. No cars idling nearby. Just him, looking older, leaner, as if power had finally loosened its grip. "You followed me," she said. "I didn't," he replied. "I found you." The distinction mattered. She heard it in the way he said it. Silence stretched between them, weighted with years they had never shared but had both survived. She noticed the fatigue he no longer concealed, the restraint that felt less like control and more like effort. "You made a mistake coming here," she said. Yes. The honesty unsettled her more than defiance ever could have. She stepped past him, keys tight in her hand, intent on leaving. His voice stopped her again, quieter this time. "They're still watching you." Her body stilled. "Because of you, because of what you know," he said, "and because you didn't break the way they expected." She turned slowly. "You didn't come to warn me." "No," he said, "I came because I was wrong." The words landed without ornament, without apology attached to soften them. She studied his face, searching for calculation, for manipulation. She found neither. "About what?" she asked. "About you," he said. "About what I thought I could control." A bitter smile touched her lips. "You controlled everything, and lost you anyway." The admission cut deeper than any accusation. "There's something you don't know," he continued. "The night I let them take you, it wasn't to protect my empire." She laughed softly, the sound hollow. "Don't do this. It was to expose them," he said. "They were already closing in. I believed if I let them think they had leverage, they'd reveal themselves. And I was acceptable collateral," she said calmly. "Yes," the word echoed, stark and unadorned. "But they never intended to stop." He added, "You weren't leverage. You were the endgame." Her chest tightened as memories rearranged themselves with brutal clarity the photograph. The questions asked too carefully, the way danger had returned even after she disappeared. "You knew," she said. "And you still let me walk away alone. I believed distance would keep you alive. And now I know it won't." The truth hung between them, sharp enough to wound them both. She had built her strength on the belief that she no longer needed him. Admitting the danger meant admitting the past still had weight. "I'm not going back," she said. "I'm not asking you to." The simplicity of the answer startled her. "I'm not here to take control," he continued. "I'm here to end what I started." She searched his eyes again. This time, she saw resolve without possession, intention stripped of entitlement. "They'll come," she said, "whether you're here or not. I know. And if they do, I make sure they don't get you." "At what cost?" she asked quietly. "Anything they take from me is already gone." The words settled slowly, reshaping something inside her she had kept rigid for too long. "You don't get to save me," she said. "I know. You don't get forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. And if I walk away right now, I'll still protect you," he said. From a distance, without interference. She studied him for a long moment, then spoke the truth she had been avoiding. "You're afraid?" "Yes," he replied. "Not of them, of losing you again without ever being honest." She exhaled slowly. "Then, be honest." "I should have trusted you," he said. "I should have given you the choice I took for myself." The admission was quiet, irreversible. She turned back to the door, unlocking it at last. "You can stay," she said without looking at him. "For tonight, we talk, we plan, then we decide what comes next." His breath left him in a controlled release. "Thank you." She paused in the doorway. "This isn't mercy. I know. It's strategy." A faint smile touched his lips. Genuine and restrained. "Then we finally agree?" As the door closed behind them, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Neither of them noticed the figure across the street, lowering a camera, sending a single message that would set the final pieces in motion. They had found her. And this time, the truth she carried was powerful enough to burn everything to the ground. The apartment felt different with the truth between them. Not smaller, not larger, just exposed. Every sound seemed sharper. Every pause weighted with meaning. She moved through the space with careful composure, setting water to boil, aligning objects that did not need aligning. He stood near the window, scanning the street below out of habit, though habit no longer offered certainty. "They've confirmed it," he said quietly. "Someone photographed us." She didn't look up. "I assumed as much. They're testing the perimeter. Not to take you, to see how I respond." "And how will you—" "By not responding at all."
That finally made her turn. That's new. It has to be. They sat across from each other at the small table that had never been meant for war plans. He spoke with a precision that felt stripped of performance, laying out names and connections without embellishment. The network was fractured but not gone. The pressure that had once moved like a tide now came in deliberate waves, probing for weakness. "I'm not asking you to hide," he said, "and I won't move you without your consent." She studied him, measuring truth the way she had learned to. "What are you asking? To let me take the weight this time?" Silence settled. Dense, but not hostile. "What happens when they realize you're not shielding me?" she asked. "They'll think I've lost control." "And have you?" A faint, honest smile touched his mouth. Yes, she absorbed that. The man who had once bent outcomes now accepted unpredictability as strategy. It unsettled her more than power ever had. "They want a reaction," she said. "If you give them none, they'll escalate. I know. And if they come here, then they won't leave with what they want." There was no bravado in the answer, only acceptance. Night pressed in. The city hummed, careless and bright, as if danger were a rumor it refused to believe. He shifted pieces without moving her redirected resources, fed misinformation, allowed rumors of his decline to spread. He became bait without ever making her the hook. "You're dismantling yourself," she observed. "I'm dismantling the version of me that made this possible." She watched him work, not with admiration, but with a wary respect she hadn't intended to feel. When he reached for his phone and then stopped, lowering it to the table instead, she noticed the restraint. "You don't have to ask permission," she said. "I do," he replied. "If I want this to be different." The difference mattered. Sometime before dawn. The power flickered, not out, just enough to notice. Her breath steadied rather than caught. "They're close." "Yes." He stood, not in front of her, but beside her. The distinction was small. It changed everything. The knock came without warning firm. Deliberate, not a request. He moved first, opening the door before it could be forced. The men beyond it were efficient, practiced, already adjusting their stances. "She has something we need," one of them said. He smiled, cold and precise. "You're mistaken." What followed was swift and contained, violence reduced to decisions rather than spectacle. He had cut the roots weeks ago. What remained was desperation and overreach. When the last man fled into the stairwell, the apartment returned to its careful quiet. She didn't speak at first. Neither did he. "You planned that," she said finally. "Yes. And if it had failed, then the consequences would have been mine." She turned to face him fully, searching for expectation, for the familiar demand that something be given in return. There was none. "This doesn't change what happened," she said. "I know. It doesn't mean forgiveness. I know. It doesn't mean anything," he finished. "Unless you decide it does." The simplicity disarmed her. Atonement without conditions. Not leverage, not repayment. She looked away, gathering herself. "When this is over, we don't go back." "There is no back," he said. "Only forward, if you choose it." They waited for authorities who would never write the full story. Explanations would be diluted, names would be sealed. The city would continue believing in clean narratives. When the door finally closed behind the last uniform, she stood by the window, watching dawn thin the dark. "You could reclaim it," she said. "The influence, the reach. Yes, you won't." "No," she nodded, a decision forming without ceremony. "Then we finish this on equal ground." He met her gaze. "That's the only ground I'll stand on." The message arrived just as the sun broke the horizon coordinates. A time, a final invitation framed as inevitability. The remnants had regrouped, desperate enough to gamble everything on one last move. "They want an ending," she said. "So do I." She set the phone down. "This time, I choose." He didn't argue, didn't advise. He waited. When she finally looked up, her expression was clear. "We go, together. And when it's done, whatever remains, we decide after." Relief flickered through him and was gone. "As you wish." They left separately, not to deceive, but to deny the enemy the satisfaction of control. Outside, the city woke to another ordinary day. Inside that ordinariness, something extraordinary had shifted. For the first time, the danger did not orbit her. It faced him. And for the first time, he welcomed the cost because paying it meant she no longer had to. The city did not react to the coming storm. It never did. It breathed, moved, glowed with careless certainty. unaware that decisions made in forgotten places would soon redraw invisible lines of power. She noticed this as she stood alone on the platform, waiting for the train that would take her closer to an ending she had chosen with clear eyes. For the first time, she was not running. The coordinates led them to the outskirts of the city, to a structure long abandoned by progress and deliberately forgotten by law. It was a place designed for final conversations, where no one expected witnesses and consequences could be buried as easily as bodies. She arrived first, as planned, her posture steady, her expression calm enough to unsettle those who watched from the shadows. They emerged slowly, no longer hiding their impatience. "You could have stayed invisible," one of them said. "You would have lived." She met his gaze without fear. "You would never have allowed that." Their attention sharpened when he appeared, unarmed, unannounced, stripped of the presence that once preceded him. He walked into the space like a man who had already let go of the outcome. "You've lost your edge," another voice observed. "You dismantled yourself for her." He didn't respond. She did. "No," she said quietly. "He dismantled himself because it was necessary." The tension thickened. Accusations surfaced. Old calculations laid bare. They spoke of deals broken, alliances undone, leverage wasted. They spoke as if she were an object misplaced, a variable that refused to behave. She listened until they finished. "This ends tonight," she said. "One way or another." The final move came without warning, clumsy with desperation. A hand reached. A weapon surfaced. She reacted on instinct, stepping back as he moved forward, placing himself not in front of her, but beside her. The distinction mattered. The chaos that followed was brief and brutal, resolved not by dominance, but by preparation. He had already stripped them of their advantages. What remained was panic, and panic made mistakes. When silence returned, it felt unreal. They stood together amid the aftermath, breathing steady, untouched by the need to speak. Authorities would arrive, stories would be rewritten, the truth would be diluted until it was safe for public consumption. She broke the silence first. "It's over." "Yes." She turned to him, studying the man who had once ruled empires and now stood with nothing to claim. "You could rebuild." "I won't, because of me, because of myself." He answered, "I don't want to win like that anymore." The honesty struck deeper than any declaration could have. They walked away separately, as planned, not to deny connection, but to honor the choices they had made. Each step carried them farther from the versions of themselves shaped by fear and control. Later, in the quiet that followed, she stood at her window, watching dawn thin the darkness. Her phone buzzed once. A message, simple and unadorned. "You're free." She stared at the words, feeling their weight settle fully for the first time. Freedom was not something given. It was something claimed. Across the city, he watched the skyline from a place that no longer belonged to him. Calls went unanswered. Names were removed from lists. Power shifted without resistance. He allowed it. When they met again days later, it was not planned. Or perhaps it was, in the way honest things often were. A public place, neutral ground, no expectations attached. "You didn't disappear," she observed. "Neither did you." They shared a quiet smile, something fragile forming between them that neither rushed to define. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "Neither do I. And you're all right with that." "Yes," he replied. For the first time, she considered him carefully. There was no demand in his eyes, no shadow waiting to claim her. "Then if there's a future," she said slowly, "it starts without debts, without protection, without power between us." His expression softened. "That's the only future I'm willing to accept." They parted without promises, without declarations that could collapse under their own weight. What remained was choice quiet, deliberate, unclaimed. The ending they had survived had stripped everything unnecessary away. What came next would be built slowly, honestly, or not at all. And that, she realized, was exactly how a true beginning should feel. Time did not rush to reward them. It moved the way it always had forward, indifferent, unconcerned with the fact that 2 lives had been dismantled and rebuilt without spectacle. In the days that followed, the city returned to its routines. Names faded from conversations. Power found new hosts. What had once felt monumental was absorbed into the background noise of survival. She noticed the difference first. Mornings no longer arrived with a tightening in her chest. The instinct to scan rooms softened into awareness rather than vigilance. She took the same routes without wondering who might be watching, spoke freely without calculating consequences. Freedom revealed itself in small, unremarkable ways, and she welcomed each one as proof that the past no longer owned her. He kept his distance, not as punishment, not as penance, as respect. They spoke occasionally brief messages, unweighted by expectation, practical exchanges, quiet check-ins that asked nothing and promised nothing, each time. He waited for her to choose the next step. Each time. She noticed. Weeks passed. When they met again, it was deliberate this time. A cafe that belonged to no memory either of them needed to escape. He arrived early, not out of habit, but consideration. She recognized the difference immediately. "You look different," she said, sitting across from him. "So do you." The observation carried no longing, no regret, just recognition. They talked about ordinary things at first. Work, weather, the strange relief of not being needed by anyone who demanded ownership. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, his words were unguarded, unpolished, the way language sounds when it no longer needs to persuade. "I sold the last holding yesterday," he said quietly. She didn't ask which one. She knew what it meant. "How do you feel lighter?" he replied. "And uncertain." She smiled faintly. "That's honest." They walked afterward, unhurried, letting the city decide the direction. The closeness felt different now chosen, not imposed. When their hands brushed, neither pulled away, neither assumed permission. They continued like that, aware of the space between them and the space closing. Both acceptable. He stopped first. "There's something I need to say," he said. She waited. "I won't build another empire," he continued. "Not in any form. I don't want a life that requires someone else to pay the cost." She studied him, not searching for proof, but acknowledging truth. "And if that means a quieter life, then I'll learn how to live in it." Silence followed. Not heavy, but full. "I won't belong to you," she said finally. "I know. And you won't protect me." "I won't," he agreed, "unless you ask." She nodded once. "And if I never do, then I'll still walk beside you," he said. "If you want company." The simplicity of the offer undid something in her she hadn't known remained guarded. She breathed out slowly, letting the answer arrive without force. "I do," she said. "I want that." They did not seal the moment with promises. They didn't need to. What mattered had already been decided not by fear, not by control, but by the absence of both. Life unfolded gently after that. They found a place neither of them had claimed before, a quiet neighborhood where anonymity felt like peace rather than exile. He learned how to exist without being announced. She learned how to rest without listening for footsteps. Their days settled into a rhythm that belonged to them alone. Arguments happened. So did silences. They navigated both with the same care, aware of how easily trust could be bruised and how deliberately it had to be protected.
When he faltered, he said so. When she needed space, she took it without apology. Love, when it came, arrived without spectacle. It showed itself in mornings shared without hurry, in evenings where conversation faded into comfortable quiet, in the way he never stood between her and the world, but always close enough to reach if she chose, in the way she never softened herself to be accepted, and he never asked her to. The past did not vanish. It receded. Sometimes. Memories surfaced uninvited. Old instincts flared. On those days, they reminded each other gently, firmly of the present they had chosen. Neither pretended the scars weren't there. They simply refused to let them decide the future. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the city exhaled around them, she leaned against him and spoke the truth that had been forming for some time. "I don't feel afraid anymore," she said. He closed his eyes briefly. "Neither do I."
They stayed there, unremarkable and real, watching light fade into night. Happiness did not announce itself. It arrived quietly, in the absence of chains, in the certainty that no one was being held, and no one was holding on out of fear. What they had built was not dramatic. It would never make headlines. It didn't need to. Because this time, love did not come from rescue or redemption. It came from two people who had chosen each other without debt, without power, without conditions. And that choice made freely, honored daily, was the happiest ending either of them had ever known.